Welcome to StarWatch Now, your front row seat to all the hottest gossip, drama, and breaking news from the world of entertainment. If it's trending, shocking, or star-studded, we're covering it. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next. What if the purest heart in show business was crushed by the very system he tried to survive? In a world obsessed with power, money, and image, one man quietly reminded millions what it means to stay kind. Until the day he was gone. His name was Menglong, and his death became a mirror that reflected the darkest corners of an empire. Stay with us because this story is not just about a star. It's about us. Menglong's life was never surrounded by luxury, nor was it meant to be a tale of glittering fame. He moved through the entertainment world with a quiet grace that made him different from the noise around him. While others polished their image, he lived with simplicity that bordered on austerity. His small apartment in Beijing contained only what he needed to survive. Clothes neatly folded in cardboard boxes, a single bed pressed against the wall, a few books, a camera, and a notebook full of handwritten lyrics. There was nothing extraordinary in the objects themselves, yet everything about the way he cared for them revealed the depth of his soul. To the people who knew him, he was a man who radiated warmth. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words carried kindness. Even in moments of exhaustion, he smiled with a gentleness that disarmed everyone around him. He was a performer by profession, but in truth, he seemed uninterested in performance. What he wanted, above all, was to create something honest, to remind people that sincerity could still exist in an industry built on illusion. When the floods struck Hunan province, you did not hesitate. He donated all his savings, quietly and without announcement, because compassion to him was not an act of charity but an instinct of being human. He often said that real success was not measured by wealth but by how much peace one could bring to others. Such words might sound naive in a world driven by competition, yet that naivety was precisely his strength. It made him a symbol of decency in a culture where kindness had begun to feel outdated. Friends often described him as having a pure aura, a kind of spiritual calm that made others trust him instantly. In an industry obsessed with power and comparison, he became a reminder of something painfully rare, that it is possible to be gentle and still be strong. Menglong was not a saint, but he carried within him a sense of quiet resistance, proof that even amid the storms of fame, one could choose to remain uncorrupted. His life was not a spectacle. It was a whisper of humanity, steady and enduring, like a small light refusing to be swallowed by the dark. The day the news of Menglong's death broke, the world seemed to stop breathing. There was no warning, no sign, only a cold headline that reduced a life of grace and struggle into a few indifferent words. Accidental fall. Just like that, the story of a man who had once been light for others was abruptly closed. Within 12 hours, the investigation was declared complete, and the silence that followed was heavier than any truth the authorities could have offered. It was the kind of silence that speaks of things deliberately hidden, of voices stifled before they can form questions. For those who admired him, the news felt unreal. How could someone who lived with such quiet optimism suddenly vanish into the night without a trace of despair? Friends who knew him well said he had plans, unfinished projects, and unspoken dreams. There were no signs of surrender, no words of farewell, no shadow of hopelessness. Yet the official narrative insisted on a simplicity that rang hollow. When people tried to ask for more, posts disappeared. When fans shared their grief, accounts were suspended. What began as mourning quickly became an act of resistance against forgetting. The silence surrounding Menglong's death was not empty. It was deliberate. It was the echo of power trying to erase what could not be controlled. The truth of a man loved for his sincerity. Across social media, whispers replaced headlines. People spoke in codes and metaphors, fearful but determined. They lit virtual candles, posted his smile, and wrote that goodness cannot simply fall from a building. The more they were silenced, the louder their hearts seemed to cry out. That silence became its own story, a reflection of the world that you had lived in. A world where the gentle must fight just to be remembered, where truth is often treated as an inconvenience. His death was not only a personal tragedy, It exposed the fragility of honesty in a system that rewards obedience over courage. And so, even though the official report tried to close the chapter, the silence refused to end. It became a haunting reminder that sometimes the absence of words reveals more than any explanation ever could. In that silence, people began to hear something deeper. The quiet, persistent call for truth that Menglong had embodied all his life. In the days that followed Menglong's death, the silence did not bring closure. It opened 1,000 doors to questions that no one dared to answer. The official report, sterile and convenient, offered only a single sentence to explain a life so layered and profound. Yet across the internet, in hidden forums and whispered threads, a different kind of investigation began. Millions of strangers became detectives, driven not by curiosity alone but by the ache of disbelief. It was as if the truth had fractured into pieces, and everyone was trying to gather them back together. 5 versions of his final moments began to circulate, each carrying its own weight of grief and fear. The first was the official story. An accident, perhaps a moment of despair. It was too neat, too rehearsed, like a line written to end the conversation rather than start one. The second suggested humiliation and abuse, a story of a man crushed by forces that had used him for too long. It spoke to the darker undercurrents of power that flow beneath fame, where people are treated not as human beings but as possessions. The third theory claimed that there were 2 scenes, 2 stories, one staged, one real. It painted a chilling picture of manipulation, of evidence moved and truth rewritten before dawn. Then came the idea of political warfare, that Menglong had unknowingly become a symbol in a much larger game. His death, some said, was not personal but strategic, an echo of the struggle between rival powers whose battles unfold far above the reach of ordinary lives. And finally, there was the most unsettling version of all, the myth of sacrifice. It connected coincidences and symbols, suggesting his passing was part of something ancient and sinister, a ritual of control masked as tragedy. Whether one believed it or not, the idea carried a strange power, because when truth is hidden, myth becomes the only language left to express pain. What all these stories revealed was not certainty but longing. Each version was an attempt to reclaim meaning from a death too absurd to accept. They were not just rumors, they were acts of defiance against erasure. People needed to believe there was a reason, even a terrible one, because randomness felt unbearable. In the end, perhaps the real truth was not in any of these theories but in the collective heartbeat behind them. The refusal to forget, the demand to understand, and the quiet rebellion of millions who still whispered his name. What made millions cry for a man they'd never met? Perhaps it wasn't only his death, but everything he represented. Menglong reminded people that gentleness is power, that kindness is still rebellion in a cruel world. He made us believe goodness still exists. He died honest. That's why we can't forget him. His name trended again and again, not for gossip, but for hope. It was as if his passing gave voice to millions who had felt voiceless for years. Maybe Menglong's story was never about politics, or conspiracies, or fame. Maybe it was a quiet message, that the human spirit can still shine, even under the heaviest chains. He proved that you can live simply, love deeply, and still change hearts around the world. And perhaps that's why power fears purity. Because one kind soul can move more people than 1,000 propaganda speeches. So when millions lit candles for him, they weren't mourning a stranger. They were reclaiming their own humanity. Menglong's story isn't over. It lives in every act of kindness we choose today, every time we stand for truth, every time we protect the innocent. If the story touched you, share it. Let the world remember that compassion is strength. Thank you for watching StarWatch Now, where we tell the stories that matter beyond fame. Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue uncovering the human stories behind the headlines. Because sometimes, remembering is the bravest thing we can do.